Welcome to our screencast on statutes. In this episode, we will get to know statutes and the different ways of looking at them, either as public laws or in codes. And yes, you read that right, using the force for legal research. With statutes, we have a story kind of like Star Wars, where we start in the middle. Star Wars, as you may have heard, started with episode 4 with the hero, Luke Skywalker, as an adult starting on his adventures. With statutes, we start in the middle of the story too, with a public law. So this piece of legislation has already become law. We will talk about the prequel, the episodes 1 through 3, when we talk about how a bill becomes a law with legislative history. And we will talk about the later episodes where other characters come in and become more important when we talk about regulations with administrative law. For now, let's get to know our hero, public law, a little bit better. So here we see our hero, public law. Our hero is given a number, 93-406. Notice that this number has two different parts, the 93, the 406. We'll be talking about these in just a moment. Also notice that our public law has a name, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974. Many public laws are given names, but not all. We can also see that our public law has the date in which our hero became law, September 1974. So let's now explore what that number 93406 tells us. So here we are at a site, congress.gov, and we see we're at the page for public laws, and we see a listing of public laws, and we see the same format, the two-part number, 116-1 and then 116-192. We also see just above that this is labeled the 116th Congress. So now we know that that first part of the number, 116, is the Congress number. We don't yet know what a Congress is. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But we now know what that number is. And the second number we can pretty much figure out is just the order in which that particular public law was enacted in that 116th Congress. So we see this is the 193rd law, and below that is the 192nd law, 191st law. This is just in reverse order. So if we want to see our hero, 93406, we now know that the first number is the Congress. That's the 93rd Congress. And we can find the different Congresses here. So we'll go to the 93rd Congress. And then we'll just scroll through and find the 406th law enacted in the 93rd Congress. So just scrolling down through the reversed ordered or chronological list, we get to our hero, 93406. Again, the 93rd Congress, the 406th law passed within the 93rd Congress, and we see, as we know, the name of our hero, Employee Retirement Security Act. Okay, so what does that Congress number, the 93, signify? Let's take a look at this Senate page. We see this is the years of the 1st through 116th Congress listed here, and we see the Congresses are essentially just numbered time periods. We see the years listed here. So the very first Congress, not surprisingly, started in 1789 and lasted 2 years till 1791. And basically all of these Congresses go through covering each subsequent 2-year period. Why 2 years? Maybe you're asking yourself. The reason a Congress lasts 2 years is that the House of Representatives, the members are each elected for 2-year time periods. So these Congresses cover each of those time periods. As we scroll through, we get through the later Congresses until, again, we get to the Congress in which our hero was enacted. And we see, not surprisingly, I hope, the 93rd Congress covered 1973 through 1974. And of course, we notice our hero was enacted in 1974, so that should make sense. So back here looking at our hero, again, we now know that our hero's number 93406 means our hero was enacted in the 93rd Congress and was the 406th law in that Congress. And of course, that Congress happened in 2 years, one of the years being 1974. Other thing we notice here, more information about our hero. On the left, we see a number and abbreviation, 88 stat. And we know in the legal world, when we see a numbered abbreviation, that's usually a citation, and the number means the volume, and the abbreviation means the set in which that document is found. So this tells us that we will find our hero in volume 88 in the Statutes at Large. That's what STAT stands for. So our hero lives on the planet Statutes at Large in volume 88. Across here on the other side, we see that within volume 88, our hero can be found on the planet Statutes at Large on page 829. So let's take a closer look at the planet on which our hero lives on. And here we see the Statutes at Large. Of course, we know that the PDF we were looking at probably comes from a print volume. So here is that print volume of the Statutes at Large. You may be able to see volume 88 here, but you can definitely see it here on the title page. So we see the Statutes at Large, and sure enough, within this volume 88 of Statutes at Large, we see part 1, and we see the range of public laws that this part covers, and 93-406 certainly comes between 93-246 and 93-446. So as it turns out, our hero has a second planetary home, and that's called USCAN. USCAN, as you can see, stands for United States Code Congressional Administrative News. Don't need to remember that. The main reason you even need to know about USCAN is that you will see USCAN cited in court cases and other materials. And so part of what USCAN does is it is the home of public laws. So looking again here at our hero, once again, we notice that our hero first started his adventures in 1974. So remember in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker, the hero, over the course of episodes 4 through 6, got a little bit older, so he changed. He got a little gray hair, maybe got a little wrinkled. If you go into even the later episodes, he grew a beard and got even more wrinkled. So he changed a lot over time. Our hero also changes over time. Those changes are called amendments. So if you think about it, if you want to know what the law is today, how does our hero Employee Retirement Income Security Act look today, almost more than 45 years after our hero was enacted in 1974? Would you have to look through every single public law passed since 1974? That would be thousands of laws. That would take forever. It would be nearly impossible, right? You want to see for your client what the law is today. And here is where we finally get to the force. The force for statutes is called codification. Basically, what codification does is a couple of magical things for us. The first thing codification does that is magical is it separates out each public law section by section and puts it in a subject arrangement known as a code. So this allows you to search the law by subject. Typically, you have a legal issue and you need to find the law about that issue. So you would want something arranged by issues, by subjects, to help you find the law. And that is the first thing that the magic of the force of codification does for us. So let's see an example of how that works. So here on Lexis, we see the United States Code Service. This is Lexis's version of the United States Code. And what we see are the listing of the contents. Each different area is called a title. Title is really just another way of saying subject area. So we see the listing of the different subject areas. As we scroll through the different titles, we can notice bankruptcy. We see Title 18 is Crimes and Criminal Procedure. Going through the titles a little further, we see Title 26, the Internal Revenue Code, and we see Title 29, Labor. Within each title, there are subdivision of subject areas. So we see the subdivision of the labor title. The subdivisions are called chapters. The name is not important. We see the various chapters within the labor title, and if we go down far enough, we see that Chapter 18 is Employee Retirement Income Security Program. So here, where the labor aspects of our hero might be found. So the labor sections of the Public Law 93-406, Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974. We see within Chapter 18 of ERISA, the shorthand for Employee Retirement Income Security Act, we see the different subdivisions, protection of employee rights, benefit rights, and further subdivisions to regulatory provisions. And finally, we get down to the section level of the code, and we notice here's Section 1144, which is the section that we have been talking about. So this concept of codification and of transferring sections from the public law to the code is really important. So let's take a look at another way of seeing this and understanding this. And to do that, we're going to go to a resource called the Table 3 tool. We will go into far more detail in class about how to use it and when you might want to use it and why you care about it. But for now, let's just take a look and see what it can help us to understand. So we are looking at the entry for our hero, 93-406, within the Table 3 tool. It, of course, tells us what we already know, that we would find 93-406 in Volume 88 of Statutes at Large. We know that it's the 93rd Congress, and we know that it was passed in 1974. Let's see what else the Table 3 tool can tell us. On the left here, we see the Act sections listed. So these are the sections of our hero, Public Law 93-406. To get a better understanding of that, let's take a quick look back at our hero. So here is what we've been looking at, and sure enough, we see the different sections. So we see sections 1, 2, 3, 4, and then for whatever reason, don't worry about it, there really isn't one. We start again at sections 101, and we see those sections continuing. So those are the same sections that we see here listed on the Table 3 tool. So 1, 2, 3, 4, then it skips to 101, and we see those sections. We then see what page to find those sections in the Statutes at Large. So here's a Statutes at Large page. But far more importantly, we see where those Act sections wind up in the United States Code. So we see these sections, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 101, all wind up in Title 29. And as we scroll down, we see where the later sections appear. So notice Section 111 A2A is actually in a different title. It's in Title 18. Remember, that was the Criminal Procedures Act. Scrolling down, a few more sections of the Act appear in Title 29. And if we go far enough down, we see a random one in Title 5, and then a whole bunch of sections wind up in Title 26. That was the Internal Revenue Code. This is another way of looking at the magic of codification, of putting in a subject arrangement the different sections of the public law. Now, one other thing you want to notice, going back up here to the top, Each of the sections wind up in its own section in the various titles of the U.S. Code. So each Act section winds up in its own section in the U.S. Code. So Section 2 here winds up in Section 1001. Section 101 in 1021. Notice those numbers are not the same. 2 is not the same as 1001. 101 is not the same as 1021. So understand that the numbering system changes entirely. So don't expect if you see the Act section that the Code section will be the same number. It won't. So we've explored the first part of the magic of the force of codification in terms of subject arrangement. There is also another amazing part, and for that, let's take a look at a section of the code. So here back on Lexis, we're looking at Title 29 USCS 1144. That's the section we've been talking about in class. So remember, we really want to know how the law exists today, what it looks like today. What does our hero look like today? And that is the second part of the magic of the code. By looking at our section in the code, we see what Section 1144 looks like today. And one way you might be able to understand and see that is to look at the history of Section 1144. Here in the history, it tells us exactly what it sounds like, the history of this section. So we see what we've discovered elsewhere, that our section, this section, 1144, was originally enacted by our hero, Public Law 93-406. And it tells us the year, and it even tells us which section of that public law, Section 514. But you can also see all of the other public laws after 1974 that amended our section. So you can see some of the wrinkles that Luke developed and a little bit of the gray hair and maybe later on the beard. All of these public laws, these amendments are those same changes to our particular section that we are looking at, 1144. So here you can see, again, the second part of the magic of codification. You can see the action of the force, that impossible task of looking at the thousands of public laws to find out what our section looks like today. Here we have, through the magic of codification, Section 1144 right in front of us. So along with talking about the magic of codification, how the force is used, just like Luke was exhorted by his mentor to use the force, we want to find out how we can use the force. How can we use codification to help us with our research? So here is one way we absolutely must use the force. We always want to make sure to check the context of our statutory code section. And you find that context up at the top in the heading information. Why is it that we absolutely have to check the context? Part of the reason is the danger of keyword searching. Keyword searching will show you where your words appear, but your words might appear in sections that are not at all relevant to your client or your issue. So we want to use the force. We want to use the force, that subject organization, by looking at the heading information to make sure that our section, that our keyword search found, or however else we found that section, that our section is on the issue that is of interest. So sure enough, when we look at this heading information, we can, of 1144, section 1144, we can tell that it's part of the Employee Retirement Income Security Program. So that's part of what we are interested in. So again, by using this subject organization and looking at that context, the subject or topic that our section covers, we can make sure that that section is relevant to us. Using this part of the force is something that you absolutely must make sure that you do. You must make sure that you are in the correct context. Another way we can use the force is to use a force multiplier called an annotated code. These are the versions of the US code that you'll find in Westlaw, Lexis, and Bloomberg, and these are essentially features of an annotated code that help you research. So let's take a quick look at each service so you can see a little bit more about this force multiplier in the annotated code. So here back on Lexis, we can see those annotated code features in this drop-down menu here. So notes of decisions and research references. And just so you see, we can see the heading information, that all-important context that you will want to check is right here on top of our section 1144. Moving over to Westlaw, again, we see that same all-important context information, that heading information to make sure we're in the right subject area, and we see the annotated code features across these tabs across the top. And finally, on Bloomberg, again, we see the heading information on top to check the context, and Bloomberg calls its annotated code features its force multiplier. It calls it the SMART code. As I mentioned, these annotated code features help us with your research. We will go into far more detail in class about these annotated code features and how they might help you with your research. So this is your basic introduction to statutes. Again, we will go into more detail in class. So like every good story, to be continued.